Hearing data, hearing action points. Good morning. This is a YouTube video. Almost forgot to say that. This is a YouTube video. I wanted to just declare that this is a YouTube video. Today I wanted to talk about hearing data, specifically hearing action points or potential action points when having meetings with stakeholders, or even having meetings with anyone where the meeting has to produce action points. That is to say, the meeting that you're having is some kind of precursor to doing work, either individually, as a team, individually in that the members of the meeting, the participants of the meeting have to do some work and then come back together. But in essence, after the meeting, there is work to be done by some individual, either who is attending the meeting or who is not attending the meeting. And that is typically the reason why you have the meeting. It's to discuss and decide things. Not always, but essentially it's to discuss and decide things or share some kind of information which is followed by some kind of action points. And I wanted to talk about my experience in meetings and how a bit of planning and a bit of thinking ahead of the meeting can make the meeting a lot more fruitful. I have learned these skills now, so I want to share these now so you don't waste any time. And I think a lot of organizations have this down pat, because meetings have the potential to waste lives, and I'm very serious about this. I'm joking slightly, but it's also very annoying sometimes, because meetings can sometimes have zero outcomes if there isn't someone who can really boil down the essence of what was talked about and what needs to be done. And those are the kind of key things of the meeting. So when I hold meetings in my organization, which I try to do at very, very, I have a very strict criteria of why I should be holding a meeting. And if I'm holding a meeting, there's a few things I make sure to do. Number one, I make sure that everyone has the context of what it is that we're talking about. And what I'll try and do is I'll only have inside of the meeting the people who need to know. It's a need to know basis. Anyone who doesn't exactly need to be there should not be in the meeting, because explaining context takes a lot of time, and a lot of the time it requires some kind of reiteration, that is re-explanation of the context after the meeting has taken place, because it's hard to fully grasp sometimes difficult concepts, especially when you're in a group of people, because typically people don't want to admit that they don't fully understand the context. And what tends to happen is that people will nod their head and say, yes, I understand that, and then after the fact they'll either say nothing and then do something incorrectly, which wastes more time, or they'll say, can I please grab you for 5 minutes after this so I can get further understanding? And that's fine, but it can be avoided with a bit of forward planning. So in the context of where you need some decision maker in the meeting, and they don't fully understand the context of the meeting, number one, get them across the information. Now you can email them as many documents as you want, or as little documents as you want, because they are they're time poor, but typically they're not going to read it, or if they do, they're not going to properly read it. So I would highly recommend, if it's something that really needs to be understood for you to make forward momentum on this problem, and to find a solution, highly recommend taking that person aside, asking them for 3 minutes or 5 minutes, because you can get them to ask questions, and you can help them to learn the context faster. And it's much better to waste the time, not waste, but it's much better to use the time of one person to get them across, what it is that we're talking about, than to to explain this to a bunch of people, because some people might try to interject and say, no, I'll explain it. And sometimes they don't get the explanation right. So if it's your meeting, get people across the subject matter before the meeting, number one. Number two, be prepared for the meeting. And, some people like to do a kind of, quick meeting, not quick meeting, an underprepared meeting, because they're like free and flowy and let's just zoopity zip this meeting. It's going to be fresh. And no, don't do that. Be prepared. Have a PowerPoint. Have a slide deck of the agenda of the meeting, so everyone feels the structure and can feel relaxed. Because sometimes when people jump into meetings, they're anxious because of all of the terrible time-wasting meetings they've been in. They don't want to be in that meeting. So be upfront at the beginning of the meeting saying this is going to take X amount of minutes, and there's no need for a meeting to go more than 30 minutes, I would say. And there's sometimes when you're doing brainstorming meetings, it takes that long, but a lot of the work should be done before and after the meeting. Only meet when necessary. So be prepared. I tend to have a slide deck. I tend to send an email around of the agenda of the meeting beforehand. Okay? And there's a risk in this though, because people have time to formulate opinions on what you're going to say, which is fine. Better that they formulate the opinion, and have it said than to bring it up after the meeting, because that essentially wastes the meeting. If you have a decision that's made in the meeting, and someone who's a decision maker contradicts that decision in the future, that's a waste of time. That's a waste of meeting. You don't want to have multiple meetings about the same thing. I love meetings, as you can see. Love meetings. Anyway. So there's two things. Be prepared. Get people across before the meeting. Be prepared during the meeting. Be explicit about the structure before jumping into the meeting. There's one other tip I will mention, and that's hearing the data. Hearing the data. Once you've said, okay, the structure, typical meeting structure, don't let people interrupt you. If they say, like, I have a question, say, oh, I'm going to get to that at the end. Or just say, oh, if they hear out the question, let people say the question, and you don't even have to listen to them, because they'll repeat the question if you don't get to it. They'll remind you. If their question is that important, they'll remember it. They will be your marker for the question. So just say, oh, that's a great question. Like, I'll get to that afterwards. And I need to stop saying like so much. That's actually something I'm trying to work on. So if someone asks a question, postpone the question until the end of the meeting. Great. Once you have finally gotten to the end of the question where people wish to discuss or ask a question, the end of the meeting, and you've finally laid out the landscape for people to discuss, you need to be listening for data and listening for action points. Action points. You're listening for what needs to be done. If it's your meeting and your meeting guidance, what direction, you're wanting to go in. You also want to hear the key opinions of people, right? And I think that's about it. Key opinions and action points. Okay? And with the opinions, it kind of ties in with the action points. You want to know what people want. You want to know what are the pain points of the people in the meeting, because people have, different stakeholders have different priorities. You want to understand their priorities. You can also understand the priorities of the people in the meeting before the meeting. Understand their priorities. Understand when they say an opinion that could be an action point. So you kind of want to hear someone's discussion or hear someone's question and elicit action points, and you want to enumerate them in your head. And it's not that easy to do, because it's hard to kind of talk and kind of list things in your head. So have paper. Oh, you look like a freaking nerd with the paper. No one cares about the freaking nerd. People want you in the meeting, and people are employing you because you're smart and you work hard. That's the reason why they have you in the meeting. Write it down. I have meetings with people, they don't write things down, and then we have other meetings and they've forgotten key discussion points, and it's just like, and people don't get mad at them. Maybe I'm just a bit too passionate about these things, but some people don't get mad at them. Like, you literally wasted everyone's time not writing this down, and now everyone's forgotten what was decided and what their opinions were about that. And that's another reason why you have the opinions, right? Is so when you come into the next meeting, if you have to have a second meeting, and that's not even talking about the follow-up email, which I highly recommend. You want to kind of say like, okay, here's what we discussed. Here are these different perspectives, right? And that helps people think that, well, it makes people feel like they're heard, and that's really important, right? These are the different perspectives, and here's the decision that we made. So what this allows people to do is go through the perspectives of this opinion or this meeting logically, and it helps them understand how you all came to the conclusion, right? How you all came to the conclusion. I'm stuck behind a garbage truck. Hey, I'm trying to get past here. This is all garbage. I can't do a New York accent. All right. I guess I'm just going to stay here now. Anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. That was a bit of a rant. That should have been a little bit more structured. But in essence, you know, what we're talking about here is being productive in meetings. So I think I'm going to try and reiterate these points, but I've probably forgotten. Point 1, prepare people for the meeting. And don't have people in the meeting who don't need to be in the meeting. You only want decision makers or people who are contributing to the work at like an architectural level. That is to say, they're deciding the architect of the solution. 2, hear data. When people have the discussion point, which you hold until the very end of your meeting, right? Sorry, structured meeting, PowerPoint, tell people what to expect, give expectations of the meeting up front and the agenda, reiterating the agenda, which you've also sent by an email beforehand. Okay. Hearing the data, you want to walk away with these action points and opinions. So when you send a follow-up email, right? And you might even want to do a document about like the meeting notes. You want to say this. This is what was talked about. These are the perspectives, and here are the conclusions we came to. Here are the decisions that were made. And you want that on paper. You want that in slate. You want to get the chisel. You want to chisel those decisions into the stone, and you want to fight to make sure, A, that they were a good decision, because the better the decision, it's more likely it's not going to get changed, which will waste people's time. You know, arguably, you will be wasting time if you make the wrong decision, but we're just talking about having productive meetings here, and that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thanks so much for listening. This is a YouTube video, and good morning.